Hey, what's going on, guys? J-Mac here. Today we're going to go over an Archon Wizard build in patch 2.3 with the revamped Veers set. Now keep in mind that this is the PTR, so everything that you see here is subject to change, and if there are some changes or balance tweaks later on, then we will cover that on the channel. But first things first, let's go over the revamped Veers set, the revamped Chantotos set, and then the brand new Fazula's Improbable Chain belt, which is the Season 4 exclusive wizard item. So, for the revamped Veers set, the 2 set reads, Archon gains the effect of every rune. The 4 set, you automatically start with 50 Archon stacks when entering Archon form, and Archon stacks give you 6% damage per stack. And then the 6 set reads, you also gain Archon stacks when you hit with an Archon ability. And you get to a pretty insane amount of stacks in this build, especially with legendary effects like the Swami. You can get over 300 stacks at times relatively easily. And then the 2 set Chantotos rework. Every second while in Archon form, you expel a wave of destruction, dealing 350% weapon damage to enemies within 30 yards. And then the second bonus, every time you hit with an attack while not in Archon form, 350% weapon damage is added to the wave of destruction, stacking up to 20 times. And your wave of destruction honestly ends up being the majority of your damage. You do a lot of damage in Archon form, but if you stack the Chantotos up properly, it does an insane amount of passive damage while you're able to cast your other Archon abilities. So the basic playstyle is that you want to be out of Archon long enough to stack to 20 on your Chantotos and then go right back into Archon to deal its maximum damage. So you want to have things like Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac and a lot of cooldown reduction on gear to make sure that you're really just out of Archon long enough to stack that Chantotos and then you're able to go right back in. Fazula's Improbable Chain. Archon stacks also increase your attack speed, armor, and resistances by 1%. And again, as you can see right now, I'm at around 250 Archon stacks. So that's a ton of attack speed, ton of damage, and a lot of toughness as well. Honestly, you can run Archon in non-season without this belt, but it's not going to be anywhere near as good, and you're not going to be able to push near as high on the leaderboards without it. Alright, next up we have the abilities. So we've got Magic Weapon Conduit. I like Conduit for when you're outside of Archon form. You make sure that you don't run out of arcane power, so that you can spam an ability to get Archon back for one thing and get your 20 Chantotos stacks. Other options would be Force Weapon and Deflection. We've got Arcane Torrent. This is what we're going to use outside of Archon form to reduce the cooldown with Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac and get our Chantotos stacks. And you'll be able to do it very quickly with all the attack speed that you're getting from the Season 4 belt. I like this ability the best currently. You get Archon back very quick with this. This also actually does a considerable amount of damage, especially when Convention of Elements rotates around to Lightning. You're going to see this thing critting for 200 to 300 million at times. Alright, next up we have Archon. It doesn't really matter what rune of Archon you run, because you're going to have every rune from the 2 set Veers bonus anyways. So we have Combustion, and Explosion erupts around you when you transform, dealing 3,680% weapon damage as fire to all enemies within 15 yards. Teleport gives you a teleport every 3 seconds. Pure Power decreases the cooldown of Archon. Slow Time gives you a slow time bubble that actually follows you around. And also your Arcane Blast and Arcane Strike abilities freeze enemies for 1 second. And then Improved Archon gives you extra damage to Archon abilities. Next up, Teleport Safe Passage. This gives you a good amount of damage mitigation while outside of Archon form, while you're trying to stack up your Chantotos and get Archon back, and also allows you to just get out of bad situations. Frost Nova Deep Freeze. Gain a 10% bonus to critical hit chance for 11 seconds if Frost Nova hits 5 or more enemies. So this gives you some CC outside of Archon, but also the Halo of Arlis, which are running in this build, will actually cast the rune of whatever Frost Nova you have on your bar. So even while in Archon form, when Halo of Arlis casts Frost Nova, we'll get that 10 crit chance if it hits 5 or more enemies. And this actually shows up as a icon on your bar now as well. Ice Armor Crystallize with the Halo, tons of damage mitigation there. Unstable Anomaly for a second life. Audacity for more damage. We're going to be pretty much in melee range or close to it almost all the time. Blur for damage mitigation and Evocation for CDR. Now if you have a Hellfire Amulet that's well rolled, I'd recommend either Cold Blooded is probably the best, or currently I'm actually been running Conflagration in a fire setup. as well. And we'll go over some of the variations of what element to run and which one's the best and all that stuff here as we go over the items. Next up we have the gear. So as far as Veer's pieces goes, we have the Veer's boots with defensive stats. You're able to get your movement speed from Paragon. The pants with intelligence, vitality, armor, and 2 sockets. The chest piece with int, vit, 3 sockets, and then reduction from elites by 11%. That could also be armor. Got the Veer's helmet with int, vitality, crit chance, a socket with a CDR gem. The shoulders with int, vitality, all resist, which could also be armor or life percentage, and then cooldown reduction. And then the gloves with int, crit damage, crit chance, cooldown reduction there. And so we get naturally 6-piece Veers without the Ring of Royal Grandeur. Chantotos wise, we have the Chantoto's Will with percentage damage and cooldown reduction on that. If you can get your cooldown reduction from elsewhere on your gear, then you could potentially go life on hit instead. Then we have the Chantoto's Force with int, vitality, crit chance, and cooldown reduction. You don't really need any skill percentage damage in this build, so you're able to go vitality and CDR on this offhand. You're going to have to naturally roll one or the other, and then roll the other one onto the offhand to get both. Again, the Fazula's Improbable Chain, like we already talked about. And then we're running Convention of Elements, which, when this rotates around to whatever element type you're running, does an insane amount of damage. And then we also have the Halo of Arlise, like we already talked about. Your Ice Armor now reduces damage from melee attacks by 59%, and then automatically casts Frost Nova whenever you take 10% of your life and damage, which we're also going to get that 10% crit from Deep Freeze because of that, which is pretty fantastic. And then on top of it, Ancient Parthan Defenders actually get procced from freezes, not just stuns, so we get a ton of damage mitigation there as well. And then we have the Eye of Etlich, which I think is pretty good. You get a lot of reduction from ranged attacks, although with your slow time bubble, you should be able to dodge the majority of ranged things by just teleporting away from them as they're slowed. But it's still pretty good. You're going to get hit from things from time to time. That's just kind of how it is. You can't always play perfectly, but I think ideally you'd probably want to run a Hellfire Amulet with either Conflagration, like I said, or Cold-Blooded, one of the two. And then as far as the legendary gems, we have Bane of the Stricken, which is the brand new one from Season 4. Each attack you make against an enemy increases the damage it takes from your attacks by 7%, which currently stacks indefinitely, but I would assume at some point during the PTR a cap is going to be placed on this because it's insanely powerful at the moment. And then you also gain 25% increased damage against Rift Guardians and bosses at the rank 25. And then Bane of the Trapped, pretty standard damage multiplier for most builds. And we're also running Molten Wildebeest Gizzard for defense, but this could also be Esoteric Alteration if you prefer to that gem instead. As far as what element type to run, it doesn't really matter. Your Archon abilities are going to take on the highest element from your gear. So currently my highest is Cold. I have Cold damage on my Bracers and my Amulet. And as you can see, the Cold Beam and all the Cold abilities right now in the gameplay there. Now, ideally, you probably just want to run whatever's going to give you the most damage. So like I said before, a Hellfire Amulet with either Conflagration, and then you'd run Fire with that, or the Cold-Blooded passive with Cold. You could also go Glass Cannon, although I'm not sure I'd recommend losing that much mitigation to get the damage from Glass Cannon, but that's something that you could at least play around with and see if it worked for you. Probably in lower difficulties that'd be fine, but if you're trying to push 60 plus, may not be a great idea. Next up, let's take a look at the Kanai's Cube legendary effects. So for the weapon, we have the Furnace, increases damage against elites by 50%. There's not a whole lot of options here really. If you don't have a Furnace, you could try to go for some sort of Serpent Sparker Mammoth Hydra setup, basically dropping the Mammoth Hydras before you go into Archon and then getting the damage from them. And Mammoth Hydras actually scale off of attack speed, so they have a lot of synergy with the Archon belt. Potentially there's some really powerful builds there. I haven't had a chance to really play around with it too much just yet, but it could be really good. The Swami, the bonuses from Archon stacks now last for 20 seconds after Archon expires. So this is how you're kind of able to double dip with your Archon stacks and get, over 300 at times. This also gives you a ton of damage mitigation while outside of Archon because of the Fazula's Improbable Chain. And honestly, a lot of damage too, really. Like I said before, you'll see Arcane Torrent dealing pretty considerable damage at times. Then you've got the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. Reduce the remaining cooldown of one of your skills by 1 second when you hit with a resource spending attack. This is very, very important. I tried to run this build without this at one point in time, and it just did not feel like it worked. Like, you could do it, but it felt very sluggish, and it's much, much more fluid with this ring. And for high pushing, this is pretty much mandatory, in my opinion. You want to try to get to around 54% cooldown reduction on your gear along with this to really, really feel like as soon as you hit that 20 Chantoto stacks, you're able to go right back into Archon, which is what you want to do. So you have maximum DPS, maximum damage at all times. Let's take a look at the Paragon Points. So get as much movement speed as you need. I have 0% on my gear, so I needed 25% here, then went Intelligence. If you feel like you don't have enough life, you can go for some Vitality here as well, but I went Max Int, and I feel just fine with that. Offense-wise, cooldown reduction, again, try to get to around 54-55% CDR. Between Evocation, the passive, and the CDR on your gear, you should be able to do it relatively easily. You can definitely go higher if you feel like you need to, but I feel like dipping under 54% definitely didn't feel right every time that I did it. Then it went crit chance, crit damage, and attack speed. Defense-wise, armor percentage, all resist, life percentage, life regen, and then utility, definitely go life on hit first, then resource cost reduction, and then area damage. So there's the build, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps you. This build is by far the most fun I've ever had playing Wizard. The build is just an absolute blast. I really enjoy the way that it plays. Before, people always kind of tried to go into permanent Archon. They wanted to just be an Archon all the time. And I like the fact that this build, you'd be nerfing your damage if you were in permanent Archon. You want to come out of Archon just long enough to get those 20 Chantoto stacks and then go back in to maximize your damage. And the way that gameplay feels is just great. It's very, very fluid, and I like it a ton. And I think you guys will too. The only thing that I don't like about the set is that you're very set in stone with what pieces you're going to run. You're going to run 6-piece Veers, and you're going to run 2-piece Chantotos pretty much in any variation. And it doesn't give you a ton of wiggle room for different builds. I feel like it's going to be a very cookie-cutter setup, but that cookie-cutter setup is very, very enjoyable to play, so I'm not really complaining at this point. So anyways, guys, again, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you want to see more PTR content. We're putting out a good bit of Witch Doctor and Wizard guides in the coming weeks, and I'm going to go ahead and leave you with a level 63 Greater Rift I did a couple days ago, so I hope you enjoyed that. Again, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Must wait longer.